Keegan, we have just moved to text change 524, the Cameron Park NCOD name change.
Good morning, everyone. Keegan McDonald, I'm with Planning and Development. So this is a relatively simple text change when it comes to the actual ordinance language. So I don't have a presentation for you all, but of course there's the staff report. I'm happy to answer any specific questions as it relates to the ordinance document. Essentially, this text change was authorized by council to make a change within the Unified Development Ordinance to change the name of the Cameron Park Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District to the Forest Park Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District. Again, this was initiated by council. Staff's kind of presumption is that this follows suit with a neighborhood initiative on behalf of the Cameron Park / Forest Park residents to update the name of their neighborhood. I will say there, I believe, was some communication amongst the neighbors to the city generally about the name change process. From planning and development's perspective, we've really been removed from that. Again, we help manage documents that we have, the comprehensive plan, the Unified Development Ordinance. So we've not been directly involved outside of this specific initiative authorized by council related to the name change. I just wanted to preface that because there's some comments in the backup materials, the engagement report specifically, about communications with the city and a process that the neighborhood went through to formalize this name change collectively. And I'm sure you'll probably hear some comments today if there's residents here to speak on it. Just wanted to let you know that this really just affects the Unified Development Ordinance, was authorized by council, and we are just moving to act on that via this ordinance. So again, fairly simple in terms of the actual ordinance language. Happy to answer any questions though, if there are any.
Thank you very much. Since the city is the applicant in this case, we will now turn to public comment for those in support. The city is not, this is city authorized text change, excuse me. There is no separate applicant. So we will move to public comment. For
There is an applicant. It was privately brought in the process. Process for text changes, unlike rezonings, is you petition city council first to authorize your text change. Once council's authorized it, then staff worked with the applicant to draft it. But there is an applicant. It's just the applicant's not the city.
Thank you. Excuse
It
me
was
for that.
brought privately. I don't know who I'm assuming the applicant's here and will identify themselves.
Yes, okay, so this was a private applicant, private citizen applying for this text change that was authorized by council. We have received a staff presentation, so now we will turn to the applicant and those in support. You'll have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Please come to the podium and introduce yourself. And seeing none, we will move on to public comment for any opposed. Those opposed to this text change will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Yes, please come to the podium and introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Eric Howard and live at 206 Woodburn Road. For 46 years, I've lived in Cameron Park. I've renovated 4 historic houses. Some of you know me through my work through the decades at Preservation North Carolina and at UNC's Department of City and Regional Planning. I am here on behalf of myself and other Cameron Park residents who are opposed to changing the name of the Cameron Park NCOD. The city has repeatedly indicated it has no procedure for renaming a neighborhood and will not take sides in this matter. The staff report outlining the request and justification for text change contains misrepresentations of facts and law. It states, in 2022, the Cameron Park neighborhood voted to change its name to Forest Park. This is now reflected through most of the city's published content except for the UDO. First, the Cameron Park neighborhood did not vote to change the neighborhood name or the name of the neighborhood association. The association's bylaws require 2/3 vote to change these names, and a supermajority was never obtained. The legal name remains Cameron Park. In fall of 2022, the association's president filed an assumed name certificate, or DBA, stating that the Cameron Park Neighborhood Association will be using the assumed additional name of Forest Park. The document plainly states that the real name is Cameron Park Neighborhood Association, thereby confirming once again the legal name of the neighborhood and the neighborhood association is Cameron Park. Has the city attorney's office reviewed and determined whether the city can change the name of a zoning district based on a DBA? Second, the staff report further states that the name Forest Park is now reflected throughout most of the city's published content. We were not able to find any such published content. The only two official city council adopted documents, the UDO and the comp plan, have not been changed. If there is city published content that uses Forest Park, where is it and on what basis was the name changed? Finally, you have been told that a majority of Cameron Park residents supported the name change. That is not true. Only 244 out of the approximately 877 neighborhood residents voted to change the name. The matter became so contentious that many of my neighbors refused to vote. The failure to get more votes in favor of renaming is why the DBA was adopted. We therefore ask that the request to rename the Cameron Park Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District be denied or at least delayed and referred to committee until all the relevant facts and evidence can be considered. Thank you for your service, and I'd be glad to try to answer any questions about this presentation or the earlier letter, if that's of any use.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in opposition to this name change? Thank you very much. Please come to the podium and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name's Robert May, 1015 West P Street. I was one of the comments posted on the portal. I'd like to ask if those could be entered into the record. And I won't go into the details. It's been clearly communicated to City Council, documentation of the fraudulent process to date. I don't have much to add to Myrick's words, other than I would just simply like to say these few things regarding the behavior of the people, the small group of people trying to change the name. This is a comment from a neighbor in the very beginning of the process. Thank you for being brave enough to not let this drop. I am not that brave. I confess that my fear of being labeled and shunned, followed by absolute disgust at the tactics of some of the change the name proponents, have basically led me to give up on this neighborhood. It now feels much more like a convenient place to live and less like a community. Initially, I felt quite sad about this, but have now come to accept the reality that the sense of community was largely due to the illusion that we all shared the same opinions about the issues big and small. The disrespect shown by so many of the emails we saw was truly eye-opening. I have felt bullied by the vocal members of the Change the Name movement. Early on, we got unnerving, repeated, "Thou shalt identify your exact dress" demands in response to any expressed opinion in favor of keeping the name. A not so veiled threat. Then we saw labels of white supremacist and racist being applied to anyone who presented ideas that supported keeping the Cameron Park name. In response to a very mild email I posted questioning the name change, a close neighbor responded, with an explosive exhortation and subsequently gives me the evil eye when I encounter her outside. I am not brave enough to stand publicly with you in opposition to the appropriateness of this, in quotes, vote. And I am not sure I could justify expressing support due to the ongoing, targeted, negative consequences that I would undoubtedly suffer. The intimidation has worked as intended. The police have been to my house. I'm still censored from the online neighborhood group for simply questioning the process. The previous president of the neighborhood association received a public beatdown in a Zoom meeting for exposing the lie of President Andrew Bagwell's claim that they received no guidance from the city. Geraldine Highsmith was a longstanding previous president of the association. In a public Zoom meeting, she tried to prove that wrong because we had an email from the city saying that that's a lie and you should follow the street name procedure change process, which specifically says property owners only included in the vote. And this vote included anybody they could possibly garner to gain support and circumvent the failure they knew was inevitable if they followed a fair and honest and open vote. Anyone that was there will never forget current Vice President Mike Lindsay jumping up and charging the stand that I was speaking from, screaming bloody murder with his face blood red. "You are out of order. You are out of order. You are out of order. You are out of order," as I simply tried to present the facts of the case, as Mr. Howard referred to. Fair and open process. All we've ever asked for is a fair and open vote. If the neighborhood desires a name change, so be it. Nobody has a problem with that. It's been far, far, far from the case thus far. The final vote did not even include the option of Cameron Park neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in opposition to this case? Then seeing none, we can bring this back to the table for thoughts from commissioners. Maybe I'll start off by noting we've seen a similar issue before. It's become a running theme over the years with NCODs and a lack of clear articulated process for amending those. And as we can see, once again, the lack of a clear and fair process on how a neighborhood itself can engage without, with amending an NCOD, and instead the only recourse is a text change that doesn't require requisite notice and input and votes from the neighbors, that it's potentially tearing apart another neighborhood, and it's really disappointing to see that happen. We're studying that in the Strategic Planning Committee right now, but just yet another example, so maybe I'll start off with that. Yes, Vice Chair Raines.
A question for the staff. It was noted that there are referrals to Forest Park on city websites or documentation already. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I can respond to that. Admittedly, I think maybe the term published content was a little too formal. By published content, I really just meant how we refer to the neighborhood when we produce staff reports and presentations. Often you'll see both names, similar to when you refer to the village district. Some people still refer to both names just to cue people in if they're used to hearing one or the other. In terms of formal documents, that is correct that the UDO, documents that planning and development publishes the comprehensive plan, unified development ordinance, there still is that term Cameron Park. I do know the neighborhood registry labels it as Forest Park. That's one kind of service that the city maintains. Again, there's a lot of different references to it throughout, not just city content, but also content more broadly on the internet, et cetera. So apologize if there was any confusion over that term, but just generally kind of when we're talking about the neighborhood in any context, we try to be as clear as possible, and sometimes that might present itself as using both titles.
Two follow-up questions. You said the neighborhood registry is that a legal term?
To my
for Forest
knowledge, it's
Park?
not a legal document. It's just
Okay.
essentially a kind of log of neighborhoods that exist within the city.
And then the applicant is the neighborhood association, or who was?
There
I
isn't-
couldn't find information on the applicant.
For this text change?
Yes.
It was authorized by council, so there's no external applicant.
I thought you said it was privately initiated.
No. This specific name change for the NCOD, it was authorized by council without any, there was no external application.
But somebody must have made that request of council.
Presumably, yes, but they're, unlike with so just to provide a comparison, there were changes to the regulations within the Cameron Park NCOD a few years ago, and that was an external application where there were members of the neighborhood who signed an application, paid a fee. We brought that forward to you all. This, by contrast, and like most text changes, was authorized from the dais by a council member and then affirmed by the rest of the council to then ask staff to draft the text change. So there's not an external text change application associated with this text change case.
Okay, because the agenda write-up said it was privately initiated. So that was my confusion.
I could be mistaken. I don't see anything related to a private application in the backup materials. And I realize this is a little unusual because it relates to the neighborhood, but again, for the record, no external application associated with this text change request.
It does sound like it was privately initiated, perhaps, though. Yes.
I'm going to defer to others.
Would it be correct to say, if not procedurally in the staff report, about who the technical applicant was, that this was in response to private, or efforts of private citizens bringing those issues to council?
I believe it probably was. Again, I hesitate to, I'm trying to draw somewhat of a distinction here because, of course, any initiative that's brought to the council's attention, whether it's on their own accord or by residents, those can precipitate requests for text changes or authorizations to staff to work on text changes. Just trying to draw a distinction between when the council authorizes us to work on something versus a text change application being filed and that being presented to the council and then them authorizing us to work on something.
And staff has been working with some of these private citizens as they've been engaged in support of this text change. Is that what it sounds like?
We were contacted by some residents who had potential interest, and my understanding is that there was then some communication to the council.
Understood. Okay.
Just point of clarification, so I'm following along with you. It was initially, private citizen reached out first, and then council followed up, or is it vice versa? I just want to make sure I'm following.
There were residents who reached out to us about potentially pursuing an external text change application where they would file it with us. We let them know that what the process was, and after that point, I believe there were communications with the council generally, and then the council authorized the text change after that point instead of the external or the residents filing an application with the city. Basically, a text change can be authorized or brought about in two ways. One is an external text change application, which we bring to the council's attention, then they make an action. Separately, the council at any time, if there's an affirmative vote, can authorize staff to work on a text change from the dais. And so really kind of two options there. We let the residents who were interested at the time know about those two options, and then they pursued, I believe, communications with council. Although we weren't involved, obviously, in those discussions with the council members.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett.
I'm a little confused. Didn't we, this is a question for staff, or maybe anybody here that remembers it, didn't we have a text change to change a street name? Yeah, we did. It was, okay, I was wondering if it was, thank you, Isabel. I was wondering if it was this street, okay.
It's a process, and that was the recommendation to the neighborhood association.
I just didn't
Right,
know
so
if
there-
it was
yeah,
this
so there is a
particular
process-
neighborhood.
There is a process to make a street name change,
And we heard one, like,
because streets are public right-of-way
right.
controlled by the city.
I understand.
Yeah.
I was thinking it might have been this neighborhood. That's what I was wondering, but it wasn't. So never mind. My other question, well, I guess not question, but comment is, I think we just had a case like this that we voted unanimously to deny. I believe it was Mordecai NCOD because one private citizen came forward and was trying to change the rules, I guess, of the NCOD without the majority of the neighborhood voting in favor of that. And whether or not we agreed with what that applicant was recommending, we all were united in our concern about the process. So for me, in an effort to be consistent, I'll have to stick with that. And regardless of what I feel about the name, I think the process is somehow flawed, that a few people or one person can come and change something that affects an entire neighborhood without the neighborhood, or at least a majority of the residents of the neighborhood agreeing to it. So,
I'll add, or being required to receive notice and those kind of things too, with the text change. Yeah. Yes, Commissioner Peeler.
Being that I was not on this commission prior to 2020, was this the kind of thing that prior to CACs being removed, a CAC would have handled, potentially? Or had at least the time at council to bring forward engagement and meeting report on?
And CACs can take up whatever they want.
Right, but prior to them being removed by council, didn't they get, wasn't the point of them to hear things like this? I'm not saying they would have had to,
So
but
the-
wouldn't this would,
The Mordecai text change, that you just heard, was discussed at the Mordecai CAC, and the CAC in this area of the city is organized and meets regularly.
so I guess the second part of that question is to you gentlemen who were speaking in opposition. What was the meeting where this was, where you were referring to, where it was discussed?
This has been in process for at least 2.5 years. Every single neighborhood meeting, that's the main topic of the meeting, and it's been a brawl.
Right. I guess what I'm asking though is like, what was that neighborhood meeting? Was it something CAC sanctioned, city sanctioned, or just private?
Neighborhood association meeting
Okay.
is still Cameron Park Neighborhood Association.
Okay.
Vice Chair Raines.
Question for maybe Mr. York. It seems like the planning commission's asked to make a recommendation on something that is a private association matter, separate from whatever the city wants to designate this area. I guess I feel like I agree with Commissioner Bennett that regardless of how I feel about what the name should be, I feel like there's a process issue that we as a commission shouldn't really make a decision on, right? And I think I would recommend going back to city council and saying that there needs to be recommended a better process for the neighbors to voice their, well,
So thank you for that comment.
those are just comments.
Holding it at the table for just a minute, echoing Vice Chair Raines and Commissioner Bennett, we were concerned about the process then. I don't see any difference between that case and this one from a process standpoint. If we, regardless how we feel about the personally about the name of the neighborhood, because this very well could be somebody trying to unilaterally change the neighborhood to something we don't like, and voting up or down just based on the content of the speech, if the process is wrong, I'm not comfortable with that either. So thank you for that. And any other thoughts, Commissioner Lampman?
Were you able to vote this out with no recommendation then?
We could, or we could vote it to deny if we were consistent with the text change for the Mordecai NCOD. Additional thoughts?
I guess I agree with all the comments. I guess the difference is on the Mordecai one, it was a private application that was brought forward that was not required, was not notified to the neighborhood. This is a city council initiated text change, regardless of if the neighbors politicked the city council to do it. This is coming from council, and I'm comfortable voting it out with no recommendation, even more so because we were just recently admonished as a planning commission about moving stuff out without recommendation. And I think the process is completely flawed. I don't think city council should be putting that the requirement on us to determine if the process had been followed. So I know typically we wouldn't vote it out without a recommendation, but I fully support that.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Commissioner Bennett?
I support recommending denial. I mean, I'm not sure
Thank you.
why we would do no recommendation. We all seem to be concerned about how this is being done, so why wouldn't we make a recommendation? So I'm comfortable with a recommendation for denial.
And I can get behind that. I think I was just trying to make a point. But
Okay.
I can 100% get behind recommending denial on this.
I would, sorry, Commissioner Miller, I would suggest, denial, but also in the statement saying that there are issues with, personally, I think there's issues with the current name, and there should be some discussion, council and neighborhood level, going forward. So just throwing that out there.
I was going to say something similar, is that, I agree with what you just said about the name. If it's coming from council, something did happen, and it sounds like we don't totally know. And I just think this is probably an issue we're going to see again and again if we don't, I don't know, ask for it to be changed.
But is it coming from council?
Well,
I think we need clarification on that because
I
I'm
think we
still
need
confused
clarification. It
about
sounds
it.
like it did, and
So I might also add, we could, I know the Strategic Planning Committee currently is looking at these issues with NCODs and specifically amending those. So we could accelerate that and include in a recommendation, a recommendation to council that they authorize a text change to provide a mechanism to amend NCODs that includes appropriate process of notifying neighbors and taking votes and those kind of things, so that then that addresses things moving forward. And I think, so that's one item. And then I think to me, whether this was privately initiated, was formally a private applicant or informally initiated by private citizens and brought forth by council, to me, I think that distinction maybe, I'm not sure the materiality of that because it's still an NCOD that can only be created in one way, with a vote of the neighborhood itself. And so to undo it or to amend it without being required to notify those neighbors and get a vote on it. I think I'm still not comfortable with it, even if the city is technically the applicant in this case. So, Mr. York?
No, it's just the official name of the zoning district.
What is the official name of a neighborhood, and where can neighbors see it?
The question for the record, for those, there's a question from the public, and then I think we're going to move to a vote on how to identify the official name of a neighborhood and what that term might mean.
And could we add
Well,
process?
the reality is official name of a neighborhood is the neighborhood name that was placed on the original subdivision map that was recorded. It has no legal entity. A subdivision is not a legal entity. It's not a person under the law, so it's just the name of a neighborhood. If you have an HOA, that is supposed to be incorporated in, and that's an entity. And then that official name is whatever name Secretary of State says it is. And you can change that name.
Same thing as qualified as a neighborhood association, have the same qualification as HOA.
Mr. York, I'll let you briefly answer that. If there's additional questions for city
Yeah, can we-
deputy attorney as well, I might
Yeah.
suggest taking that offline. Okay. Those might be helpful for the private applicant, but again, I would recommend just connecting with the deputy city attorney offline for that one. Thank you. Any additional comments? Commissioner
Clarifying
Langman?
question.
Yes.
Are you suggesting that this goes to Strategic Planning Commission and it be delayed, or what was your?
I was just
proposal there?
identifying, I think one option, it sounds like the will of the commission is to vote to deny this case, but we could also include in that motion a recommendation that council authorize a new text change to provide a fair process for amending an NCOD.
If I may, I'm not opposed to that. Could we split out those two votes separately?
Sure. We may. I believe so. Is that right?
I'd like to speak against including that in the recommendation this time around. I think that is, in strategic planning, it's in a good place, and we can take this issue up. It's part of the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District. And to provide a direct recommendation to council at this time, I think would be a little premature. If we could take it through Strategic Planning Committee, then we could come with more specific and informed recommendations for what we would like council to look into.
Thank you. That is also an option.
Just for clarification, you were saying move the entire case to
No.
strategic.
So what I would support is denying this because there's a lack of a process to support it. But continuing to talk about this in strategic planning where we're already talking about NCOD policies.
Thank you. Yes, so those are two options so I guess maybe we can, would someone like to make the first motion with respect to this text change?
Chair Miller, I will attempt to try to make that motion. For text change, sorry, let me see if I'm on the right one. Text change case, TC 524. I've moved to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated May 28th, 2024, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend a denial of the zoning text amendment based on the lack of a coherent process with the neighbors and city.
Thank you very much. We have a motion, so it sounds like you adopted the consistency statement plus you added that additional reasonable and public interest statement. Thank you. Do we have a second? Second. Commissioner Otwell has seconded. Any further discussion? By show of hands, all those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. The second item about potentially either recommending a text change versus continuing to study this issue in the Strategic Planning Committee, it sounds like those are just two options. I'm not necessarily in favor of one versus the other. That said, I do think it could benefit from further study in the Strategic Planning Committee so that it can come up more fully formed as a recommendation to council. Any additional thoughts? Yes, Commissioner Bennett.
Since Strategic planning is already studying the issue of NCODs. Do we need a motion?
If we're going to keep it there, we do not need a motion.
Okay.
So by sort of nods, anyone want to just keep it at strategic planning? Yes? Okay. Well, then in that case, there will be no further motions on that item at this time. And those who are continuing to be interested in this can, we will post notice of our strategic planning committee meetings that are directly addressing this issue. I believe we will be meeting in August on this. Yes. Okay. So then, in that case, moving on to the next item in new business, rezoning